everyone, I'm Charlotte and I'm a fashion historian. Today's video we're going to talk about Cinderella, as you can see from my Disney bounding outfit. And I thought we could discuss about different adaptations of Cinderella. And I thought we could discuss different style of dresses that Cinderella wears in different adaptations. I picked Cinderella because Cinderella is my favorite princess, or was when I was growing up, and the reason why Cinderella was my favorite princess when growing up was because of her dress. So I literally based on my decision to watch my favorite Disney princess to the question who has the prettiest dress. And that was Cinderella for me. There are countless versions of Cinderella, and I thought it would be fun to review some of Cinderella's dresses and look at the historical origin of it and what historical styles those adaptations have based their Cinderella's dress on. The earliest variant of Cinderella's story is from Greek between 7 BC and 22 AD, where a Greek slave girl marries King of Egypt. The first literary European version is from 1634 and it was published in Italy. And the most famous version is obviously from 1812 collection of Grimm's fairy tales. So we don't have a specific time frame for Cinderella. So different adaptations has decided to put Cinderella to different time frames. But usually Cinderella is a fairy tale, so it is more for that magical and not really historically actually based. So the adaptations that I'm going to talk about in this video are Disney's original Cinderella from 1950 and Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella from 1997, Ever After from 1998, Ella Enchanted from 2004, Into the Woods from 2014, and the new live-action Cinderella from 2015. About the color scheme. In most of adaptations, Cinderella's color is usually blue. In other adaptations, just not in just these, but usually when we think of Cinderella, we think of blue. And that is actually because Disney's original 1950s film. Actually, in the 1950s film, Cinderella doesn't wear a blue dress, she wears silver. But because of the lighting of some of the scenes, it looks like it's blue. And that is why the merchandise and the pictures, when you see Disney's Cinderella, she wears a blue dress. And that is origins of Cinderella's blue dress. In the Grimm's Brothers version, in the story I mean, Cinderella wears a dress of silver and gold. And that is what we're gonna see in some of these adaptations. They have definitely gone through the Grimm's adaptation. And that is probably why also the Disney's original 1950s Cinderella movie has a silver dress. Because of the Grimm's adaptation saying that to be gold and silver, but they just picked one of two, so they picked silver. Let's start with a 1950s Disney's adaptation. For this adaptation we don't get a year they set in, but my personal assumption it is based on architecture, because there's a lot of Gothic revival architecture seen in the film. And also when we look at the people in the background in the ball, the dresses are very 1850s and romantic era style of dresses. I know that when I said 19th century it sounds very broad definition, That's because the Romantic era dresses gives a strong idea of the 19th century. Most of the costumes do look like Romantic era, which is from 1830s to 1860s, but Lady Tremaine, Cinderella's wicked evil stepmother, she looks more like 1890s. So based on that, we could trim it down to the Romantic era, really, except obviously Lady Tremaine. As this adaptation came out in 1950s, it makes perfect sense to be set in the Romantic era. And this makes sense because of the new look, which was styled in the 1950s, came after World War II. And you know the new look, it's a cinched waist and big skirts. And that the new look was actually inspired by Romantic era dresses. It was going back to history and being back to the Romantic era. So it actually makes perfect sense because the costumes of 1950s Cinderella, they do fit to the contemporary fashions as well. So they are not just going back to the past, but it's also like borrowing from the past, but also borrowing from their present, their contemporary fashions. For the actual ball gown in this movie, Cinderella wears a silver dress, which is a complete fantasy and cannot really be set in the particular era. But if I have to pick something, I would say it's something like 1850s or 1860s. As you know, Cinderella's dress has a small puff sleeve, but it's on top of the shoulder. And in the 1850s and 1860s, there was a tiny little puff, but it was off shoulder, so in that way it almost looks like it, but not really, you know. In the movie, it is said that the silver of the dress is to complement her eyes. Also, silver is color of wealth, so to attract a prince, you should look beautiful and wealthy, which makes sense in this context. And also the Grimm's brothers' tale, telling that the Cinderella dress was gold and silver. Okay, let's talk about Cinderella 2015. Next, I want to jump up straight to the 2015 live action adaptation of Cinderella, and that is because the 2015 adaptation is a live action version of the 1950s one, so they are directly related. Again, the audience isn't given a year that is set, but it's similar to 1950s adaptation that the fashion nods to the Romantic era fashion. Also, this adaptation nods to the new look as well and to the 1950s fashion, which I love as it does remind us from the original Cinderella that came out in 1950. So I think that's a really clever way to add those both together again. There are also 18th century costume that is worn by the fairy godmother. But otherwise it's pretty clear that it's mixed with 1950s and 1850s, all of the costumes. So Cinderella's ball gown in this one, it's off the shoulder, and it has a tiny waist and huge skirt, and it's blue. This is important, it's blue because of the merchandising, and we're thinking of Cinderella's dress as a blue, and that is why it is blue and not silver like in the original one. The silhouette is very much 1850s with contemporary materials. The butterflies in her neckline is to represent her relationship with the animals, which is much more prominent in the 1950s adaptation than in the 2015 adaptation. It is often told that butterfly spends a lot of time as a worm and then turning out into a butterfly which lives only for one day. And this is representing that night, that ball for Cinderella, is that one night as a butterfly. Because she thinks that's the only time that she'll get to live as like a princess and be like a princess. Okay, let's move on to the Rodgers and Hammerstein Cinderella from 1997. So there's 3 different movie adaptations of Rodgers and Hammerstein's musical Cinderella. But I cannot go through all of them in this video because this would be quite a long video if I would go through every single Cinderella adaptation that there is. But I chose this one as I feel like this is the most known one. A lot of people have mentioned this when I asked on my Instagram what is their favorite version of Cinderella. So I chose to focus on this one instead of covering all 3. Musicals tend to have much more liberty with their costumes than other type of films, because in the universe of musical, people can just burst into song in any minute, and it is not to be weird, so fantasy costumes isn't such a reach for anyone. Again, we don't get a year that the film is set in. For this one, we cannot even date it because the costumes are complete fantasy, really. The ball gown in a 1997 adaptation is made of blue tulle and very light blue satin with a lot of rhinestones. The bodice is off shoulders and it has peplum. It is very clearly inspired by the 1950s Cinderella, and she's also wearing gloves like the original one, Disney's original one. But still, it is clearly a contemporary adaptation of this dress. It also has 2 different tones in the dress, just like the Disney's original one. So it is very similar to Disney's original one, but in contemporary way. Next one is Ever After. When I did a poll on my Instagram which Cinderella movie is their favorite, Ever After was a clear winner. It seems like this one is most of your favorite. The main story of Ever After is set to the Renaissance France, but based on actual historical figures that we see in the film, it is said that this is set in early 16th century France. Even though this is set in the France, the costumes are actually very much Italian Renaissance costumes. But even though the costumes do look like the wrong place, they are really actually quite accurate to the Italian Renaissance. So we have finally an adaptation with actual historical costumes. In this adaptation of Cinderella, Cinderella isn't called Cinderella but Danielle. For the ball scene, we have a masquerade ball where Danielle wears her mother's old wedding dress. There actually isn't a fairy godmother in this one. And the dress has wings that has been made by Leonardo da Vinci. The dress itself is silver and pretty and very beautiful with all of the decorations. And the dress is pretty accurate with silver color, which makes sense for the wedding, as wedding dresses back then didn't have a one set color like we do now. For your wedding, you would have worn your most expensive looking dress, and wearing silver for your wedding, it makes sense because silver is expensive, you know. So this dress looks something that actually a Renaissance bride would have worn. Also, the silver color is tying again with the original Grimm's Brothers tale with the color silver. Also, she's wearing butterfly wings with this one, which is also again a metaphor of Cinderella's one day as a butterfly, one day as a princess, even though in the end it turns out it's not just the one day. But you know. Next one is Ella Enchanted, and Ella Enchanted is much more loosely based on Cinderella than the other adaptations that I have talked in this video, but it is set in the fantasy world. So again, For Enchanted, we don't get a year they set in, but visually the film is mixing medieval imagery with early 2000s fashion, which is very interesting. Ella wears often a milkmaid top with a brown leather belt, and a maxi skirt, which is blue. Again, blue tied to the Cinderella's color as a blue because of the Disney's version. But this medieval aesthetic doesn't extend to the ball gown. The ball gown is white with shining layers of organza. The movie is based on a novel of the same name. I haven't read the novel, but the novel probably has dictated that the dress to be white. But it also nods to the Disney's 1950s Cinderella with the white, like shiny, and with the silhouette of this dress. Because this doesn't really fit Ella's style, I think. There's a reason why this dress doesn't really fit Ella's aesthetic, and it is because it's made by her fairy godmother. And Ella's fairy godmother doesn't really understand her. Ella even doesn't want to go to the ball because of the reasons, and if you have seen the film, you know why. I don't want to spoil you. And the dress is more of a reflection of Ella's fairy godmother than Ella's own style and Ella's own story. So that's why it doesn't really fit to the narrative, but it kind of does because it's not really Ella. Next, let's talk about Into the Woods. So Into the Woods is a musical that ties together 5 different Grimm tales, and Cinderella being one of them. Into the Woods doesn't really have one set of time frame that is set, and different characters kind of wears different style of costumes from different eras. So they don't all tie together really. It's just different fairy tale sections wear their own style kind of, which kind of makes sense and helps you separate those stories on screen. And Cinderella's dress and her stepmother and stepsisters, they all wear 18th century inspired fashion. So in this adaptation, Cinderella's ball gown is gold. And obviously the color gold comes straight from Grimm's Brothers version. And also this adaptation of Cinderella's story goes more like the Grimm's Brothers version than in any of the other ones that I have talked in this video. So the actual gown is not really a gown, it's just a pair of gold stays. If you don't know what stays are a predecessor of corset, and layered skirt with a train. She also wears this like tulle on her neckline, which makes the gown a bit more modest, so it doesn't look as much as underwear, as stays are underwear. Also, the gold color fits much more better to the dark color scheme of this film than silver would, so that's why they probably went with the gold rather than silver. In conclusion, it is really interesting to see how different Cinderella adaptations has taken the Grimm's tale and Disney's 1950s Cinderella as an inspiration for the other adaptations. And as I promised in the title of this video, I'll now rank the dresses, not the films, just the dresses, and I'm not ranking them on historical accuracy, but how much I actually like them. So it's fine if you disagree. You probably will disagree. Actually, tell me in the comments what's your ranking of the dresses, or what's your favorite dress. So let's start from my least favorite to my favorite. To be fair, all of these are beautiful, so it's no disrespect to the dress. On the 6th place is Rodgers and Hammerstead's Cinderella from 1997. It's just a little bit boring to me. In 5th place, I placed Ella Enchanted one. just because, again, it's a little bit boring. It doesn't really... I would have loved something like a medieval, actually that looks like medieval, like something with big sleeves, and it just looks too similar to the other Cinderella dresses to me. On the 4th place, I placed Disney's live action 2015, even though from all of the live action versions, I think this is the best one, best remake of the dress. But still, I placed it in the 4th place because it's blue. Now that I have researched the thing, I think I would have loved it to be like silver something. Something different than blue. In 3rd place, we have Ever After's dress. It's gorgeous, it's historically accurate, it's silver, it's pretty. I don't really like those wings, but whatever. In the 2nd place, I placed the dress from Into the Woods. And this is for personal reasons because I love stays. They are just such a beautiful garments. And I'm obsessed with underwear, so love it. And then in the 1st place we have Disney's original 1950s Cinderella dress. That's just the best one. I don't know what else to say about that dress. It's just pretty. It's beautiful. I kind of want it. But yeah, that was the video. I hope you enjoyed. Give it a like if you did, and subscribe if you liked. And if you want to see more, subscribe, please, yeah. And go follow me on Instagram, it's Period Corset. And yeah, thank you for watching, and see you in the next one. Bye!